Welcome back, everybody. And even if you don't have a body, but I recommend that you do. I'm Layman Pascal on the Integral Stage, and this is an episode of our special sub-series called Love the System, in which we dive into the principles, procedures, protocols, and practicalities that accompany the culture and consciousness of the overlapping transformational, developmental, and regenerative liminal webs. And folks, I don't love talking about money. I've been working on reorienting that feeling over the years, but mainly I just want to do silly things and discuss why my sense of self seems so elusive and sparkly. But it's pretty clear that if deeper values, integrative thinking, and the flourishing of leading edge culture is going to occur, it needs to be grounded on a solid foundation of leading edge economic savvy. What do each of us have to do psychoenergetically, attitudinally, bioemotionally to be properly disposed toward making more money and establishing viable material conditions for ourselves and our families in the world at large? What needs to shift or emerge in our collective sensibility, and what kinds of projects, institutions, and structures can support, express, and accelerate these processes in ways that concern not only the people of the world, but also the people who populate the liminal webs? How does our big picture relate to the everyday picture of people's lives? Are we paying enough attention to that? Sometimes visionaries can't see the forest through the trees, which is why today we're talking with the host of the Forrest Wilson Experience, Forrest Wilson. Hi.
Hey, Layman.
How was that?
Pretty awesome. That was quite a riff. I'm applauding over here. Amazing.
Okay. To misquote William Gibson, who spoke at my high school, the future economy is here, but it's not evenly distributed. But other than being unevenly distributed, what is the state of the emerging economy? If you had to channel its mood or sum it up, how does it look to you at the moment? Where are we? What's the feeling in the field?
Yeah, I love the question for a few reasons. Number one, when you say the state of the emerging economy, I've been speaking a lot recently about the state of consciousness that we're embodying and emanating as we're acting in the emerging economy, and that the emerging economy is sourced from. So I have a collective I'm working with. I've told you about our emerging future, and we have a community of practice where we come together and gather in the state of consciousness that the emerging economy is being sourced from and infused with. So you spoke about the systems, the institutions, the cultures, the technologies, the way of being, the state of consciousness itself, the field of consciousness that is, that all of these structures and forms are manifesting from. So I could speak about the state of consciousness itself, and then I could speak, there seems like another question in there, which is in terms of emergence and emergence emerging, what's the latest and what's happening on the front end.
All right,
So,
give us both.
okay. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So I just was scribbling this morning before our call, like a hopefully helpful model of a couple of stages of evolution in the economics for an individual, right? So for anyone listening, I have a lot of experience supporting people going through economic journeys, relationship with money, and specifically people pursuing the mystical path and wanting to blend the mystical and the marketplace, right? Like and midwifing in the emerging economy. So I just wrote down these 5 stages. Okay, so one is when we're dependent, when we're a kid or we're a teenager, and our parents most likely are taking care of our financial needs. The next is when we become independently financially resourced, whether we get a job or we start a business or whatever, we're earning our own income. Then stage 3, we enter this state of, I don't want to be dependent on a business. I don't want to give my life away to this 9 to 5 or whatever. Even if it's my own business, I might still be an employee of my own business in a way, and I'm working all the time on my own business. So I start to take my power back and say, I want to start to look inward and say, what's the life that I'm here to live? What's the soul purpose deep down inside me that wants to be expressed? What can we do through me, right? Like, what's my calling in this lifetime? And this is where it starts to get really interesting. I can speak to subtleties in this, but stage 4 is what I call the emerging economy. And this is where what's best for me and what's best for we are the same thing. What's best for we and what's best for me are the same thing. We're all actualized, instantiated, and stable in our gifts. We're in a generative, regenerative, reciprocal relationship with other human beings and with nature-based systems, with reality. and we feel embodied in our creative power, embodied in our soul purpose, and we are emanating this reverberation of like a quality of right here, right now, in this moment, everything's okay. Wholeness is getting more whole, perfection's getting more perfect, and all the good things we talk about, right? Stage 5 I can speak to later if we want to go there. That's just what I get glimpses of as a potential kind of the next iteration of humanity. But yeah, so speaking to that, well, I'm going to pause there. How's that to hear for you, Layman?
That's great, and I have some curiosities about it, but I'm going to let you keep talking about the state of consciousness, and we can come back to both the fifth stage and my curiosities.
Yeah, great. So I initially made this map just for individuals, but I'm mapping it to collectives and to societies and cultures, right? And so what's really interesting for me right now is how do we get to that stage 4 emerging economy stage as a collective? Most people in the air quotes business world are in stage 2. We're doing something we don't really want to do, or that is it's some percentage, right? It's not a binary thing, but maybe we enjoy our job 50% of the time or 85% of the time, right? But it's not that 100%, like this is what I was innately designed to be a part of on this planet, right? It's a different experience. And then we have a lot of communities now where people who are, let's say we outgrow that experience and we just can't, there's like a point in our psychosomatic social experience where we can't even go into a desk job anymore. Like the capacity to do that almost falls apart. And, you know, we do what we do, right? We travel the world, we sleep on people's couches, we go stay in intentional communities and these kind of things. But oftentimes a lot of these communities, which have popped up like crazy over the last few years, right, where we're doing consciousness work and practicing intentionally together, practicing presence, deepening into wholeness, cultivating our capacities for shadow work and trauma work and energy work and collective emergence and all these kinds of things. The challenge is at that threshold is the risk is for most of us, right? Certainly speaking for me, you end up not making any money because we're in this weird transition phase, which you wrote about in your article, and we could speak more to, and just in context of how we got here. So the question is, how do we make it through that? Right? There's this really uncertain liminal space where we've outgrown the world we've been in. We've outgrown the economy that exists on planet Earth in majority. We step out into the unknown of, I don't know how this is going to go. I know I can't do that anymore. And I know there's something else out there, but it hasn't showed up yet. And most of us are doing this as individuals. There hasn't been a collective coming online yet of an economy, a marketplace, a way of being, support structures, social fabrics of support to support people who are playing life like this. So that's my passion, is living it myself, inviting people into it, working with communities who are doing it, and emerging what we call metacelium, the mycelium network of the meta ecosystem, the underlying infrastructure of support to support the supporters of this emerging future and way of being, an emerging economy.
Yeah, I love the phrase metacelium and the notion of supporting the supporters. But I think one of the things that jumped out at me hearing your stages is kind of a curiosity around how much of that transition to the fourth stage is about building new structure, and how much is it about repairing things that might have been inadequately manifested in the previous steps.
Yeah, can you say more about the inadequately manifested in previous steps?
I mean, I think there's, for some people, there's a question of like in the dependent phase, for example, you have to be able to receive things, right? That babies do that. But a lot of us come to maturity and we have a lot of anxieties around receiving. We don't like it when people give us things. We don't set ourselves up to be able to receive. It makes us uncomfortable. And then likewise around independence, there's a lot of people who sort of struggle with residual angst and incapacity and a sense of not knowing or not being capable, or worrying that they don't know or are capable in order to go through that phase. So in terms of all these stages, it might be that there's some residual shadow from these lower levels that if it was healed or cleaned up, they might be able to move forward with more of their energy. On the other hand, there might be elements of this transition that are purely novel that just have to rely on completely new things emerging.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You're spot on. The core drivers, right? The core coding and consciousness that grows up through the different stages. If we have an echo or a reverberation from an earlier level, like you said, if we have a challenge with receiving, or if we have some type of shame story that's sitting on top of our autonomy, for example, or our passion, our innateness, some challenge with standing up in the world and speaking what's true for us in the moment. These things grow up into the later developmental levels. So absolutely, when we're talking about what is it that's coming online for the emerging economy, so much of that is going back to our earlier stages of development and doing the shadow work and the cleanup work so that our natural, organic, evolutionary impulse and flow of consciousness can unfold into these later stages robustly and full of resourced good stuff.
A lot of people in these fields are, and it's, I think, partly because they are emerging towards a stage where they want a calling, they want to participate in something larger. They see a set of concerns in the world that requires us to change and transform and develop. And then part of it is some people just all their lives have been oriented toward philosophy or spirituality or the arts or something like that. And in all of these spaces, there can be a certain antipathy toward money in general, a certain reluctance, like business is dirty. They don't want to be a part of it. It makes them uncomfortable. They don't like those settings. Um, how valid is that feeling? And what do we do in order to help people grow through that feeling without sacrificing any of the validity that's in it?
Yeah, beautiful. I want to speak to that, and I also want to include you because I heard you in your introduction say, I don't like money, or I don't like talking about money. I forget exactly how you said it. So I want to welcome in your personal experience here too. Maybe you could share more on that.
Yeah, it was. I don't know how much I'm speaking for myself and how much I'm speaking for an imaginary set of listeners. But
Sure.
there's a certain kind of, you know, I love having money. I need money. It's useful for things. I love treasure, all that kind of stuff. But I'm in a lot of economic discussions with people, and it can be extremely draining. And very often, they're not always. I mean, you're fun, but it's not always a fun conversation to be in an economics conversation. It's very anxious for a lot of people. It makes them feel very close to their survival issues, and it also sounds like it's not sparkly, it's not enchanting. Some people are kind of existentially devoted to magic and mystery and altered states and beauty and all these things that we want them to be devoted to, and their soul just goes whenever they have to go to the bank or open up a letter or something like that.
Yeah. 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 Beautiful. Thank you. I feel more connected to you hearing that. And it also touches into a lot of my passion because, of course, I love the mystical and the psychedelic states, or traversing different territories in consciousness and just exploring the universe. And there's um, for me, the money component has been what is it really possible for us to create together? When you start to get to the core drivers underneath money, there's quite a bit about sovereignty, power, our capacity to embody something visceral, like a almost Shakti energy or a level of creative force, capacity to manifest that's moving through our system. And so, to your earlier question, what happens is a lot of times we associate things with money that, quite frankly, don't have anything to do with money, right? Like let's just take one of the most common examples in the world. When I was young, mom and dad fought because of money. It's like, no, mom and dad didn't fight because of money. Mom and dad fought because of relationship issues, and money got the credit, right? It's like money was the excuse or the thing that money that could be argued about. But the fact is, mom and dad aren't getting along. There's a host of things going on underneath that, and money's getting the blame or the credit or the projection. So a lot of the work can just be taking our projections off of money and seeing it's not actually money doing these things. It's human beings doing these things. And so again, we're taking our power back here. There's more capacity to be in our power when we quit blaming money for things and we start going, oh, it's actually us, the human beings, who are treating each other like this. It's not money doing that, right? Like if I prioritize money over reciprocity in my relationship or treating someone else, that's not money. It's not money that did that. It's me. It's my values. It's what I care about. It's where I'm coming from. It's what I prioritize in connection with people. So the more we start to peel these projections off money and take back our life force energy and our power and take responsibility for how we're showing up in the world, things start to shift.
Yeah, I love that because I tell myself and other people who are concerned about the sources of money as if they don't want to be contaminated by where the money's coming from. I usually tell them all money's dirty. Like your job is not to
Okay.
figure out where it's coming from. Your job is to clean it when you take it in. But what you're saying is there's an element to which we are adding the dirt ourselves by over associating it with areas that aren't really its problem. We've been uncharitable towards wealth itself in a lot of these communities.
Yeah, and it's so culturally popular now. Like, I mean, these are just the stories we've grown up in, and when you're swimming in the soup, oftentimes you don't know that you're in it, right? Until you kind of get out of it. But once you get out of it, you see, oh yeah, we're giving all the credit to money for this stuff that's really the way that human beings are treating each other. I mean, if we gave everybody a bunch of money, would that solve all the challenges we're focusing in the world? Maybe it would solve some of them. And like you and I are talking about, there's these underlying parameters in consciousness and in the human experience that need to be fleshed out. We've been talking all about them today, being able to be in our power, articulate the experience we're having, engage in reciprocity, listen, like all kinds of things, receive, right? You spoke about receiving. That you can't just throw money. And I've seen this in a lot of ways. Like there are moments where the most functional and useful thing to do is not put money towards a challenge. Actually, like to speak on a personal level, just to give an example, on a personal level, a few years ago, I ended up homeless, right? I was doing this emergent living experiment for years. And still am in a way, although I feel like I'm on the other side of this form of it, which was being completely broke, traveling around the world in the moment, attuning to the animating unseen forces that move through the universe and living off $4 or $5 at a time for the most part. And at some point there was a deep knowing inside myself. I remember being down to just a few dollars, and there was this thought of like, okay, I can call some people for some support and ask for some money. And something in me knew I need to actually suffer through this. And I really like, I'm gonna be okay on the other side. I was even have to sleep on the ground or whatever, like this kind of thing. But I need to suffer through this so I can get strong enough on the other side to stand up and not deal with this moment again. If I get somebody to come in right now and give me $1,000 or something, I'm just going to remanufacture this scenario again. And so there was a deep knowing of I need to actually suffer through the challenges that are going to liberate the potential of what's here, because I know I can walk through the world, embodying my passion with my soul on fire, share my gifts with the world, and be well resourced financially. I know this is possible deep down in the core of my being. I can't figure it out, but I'm going to just struggle through it until it kind of shakes its way into being. So there's an example at least.
Yeah, that's great because I think a lot of the trouble that I see in people is an inability to connect with the drive that wants more, and that can be money, but it also can be strength, can be capacity that we're sometimes as individuals when we're trying to release egoic bondage, release karmic patterns, step back from what we see as accumulating problematic patterns in the way civilization is run, we can get into this mode where we think relinquish, release, less is more. And there's some truth to that, but we also have to be in touch with the drive that says, more is more. I actually want more. I need more. I want to be stronger. I want to be more capable. I want to grow and expand my influence. And then if I hear people, I look at them from the outside and I think, you know what, you guys are the best people as far as I can tell. You're the people that the civilization needs. So I want you to have more. I want your immediate ability to impact the world with your patterning to increase. Yeah, not a question, just a feeling.
No, it's so beautiful. I love what you're sharing, and it gets into this really nice distinction in this model that I've made up that may end up being useful or not, but but at stage two, right? The more that we want is mostly material things. It's all the things that people get judged for wanting, like yachts and cars and trips and et cetera. And it's very out there in the world. At stage four, the thing that we're wanting more of deep down is fulfillment. Right. And so when I talk about at stage three, we pull our power back from all the material things and we go, wait a minute, almost like a monk. I don't need these things in external reality. Like it's not what you go through, it's how you go through it, right? You get this really Zen thing of I can take all my power back from my projections and cultivate my state. No matter, even if I'm homeless, I can still experience bliss. And then if we bring our consciousness into that power, into that raw primordial power is what we in our circles we or non-symbolic consciousness is another way, just consciousness itself. We bring our awareness into that energy and we breathe and we nurture it, we cultivate it. It starts to permeate through every single cell of our body and every fiber of our being. We literally start to emanate and radiate out pure creative life force potential into the world. And that's the fulfillment we want more of. And then reality shifts in relationship to that change. So we cultivate more of that. We emanate more of the love and the truth and the beauty and the goodness that we are into the world. We do this in the marketplace, in relationship with our clients, in relationship with the businesses and the vendors that we interact with, sharing the love that we have through money as we purchase a product or a good or a service, sharing the love that we are with someone as we support them and care for them as they're going through their own evolutionary journey. That's a quality of moreness that starts to be deeply, deeply satiating of like, we all know this once we start to do it. I just want to be able to give more. I just want to be able to share more. And the key there is to not give away all our power. It's to actually keep our power, to breathe and nurture it and cultivate it until we radiate it. And then it permeates out into reality just as an expression of being the being we are. So there's a moreness in that as well.
That I'm enjoying this because all of that you just said, which was great, could sound like a smart, creepy infomercial spiel, except that it's clear that you've got a critical outside awareness of it and that there's enjoyment of your ability to embrace it and critique it at the same time. So I really find that impressive, laudable, and a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm quite enjoying that. In some way I can sound like a creepy infomercial right now. That's awesome.
Hashtag creepy infomercial. All right.
Maybe
One
we
of the
do
things I'm
some
really interested in is
modern infomercials.
yeah, meta infomercials. This could be something. We got a show here. Time frames is on my mind, and I called the article that I wrote. The subtitle was about transitional economies because on the one hand, there's this like very small time frame of just the present moment or just today and what it's like when you come out of meditation or out of the woods or off a psychedelic trip and you're just in the moment and whatever happens happens. And on the other hand, there's a lot of people who have these very distant big picture critiques, right? Maybe we need some form of socialism. Maybe we need modern monetary theory. Maybe we need this or that fundamental retooling of the economic model that we're in. And I hear those, and there's a lot of sensibleness to those critiques. But when are they going to happen? They're not going to happen in 5 years or 10 years, maybe not in 20 years, maybe not in our lifetimes. So it seems to me that we've got to sort of emotionally start to zero in on some sort of in-between time frame. What's actually functional for ourselves and the people in our lives and can make a difference in the world over the next few years or the next couple of decades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an experiment. This is an experimental world we're talking about. So I can tell you about lots of things I've tried that haven't worked. And I can also tell you about things I'm trying now, which is more interesting in my opinion, because it might work, right? It's informed by the things that haven't worked. Yeah, is there something you want to say there?
No, I would just say that I think it would be great to hear about a couple of things that didn't work.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing, well, I ran a ecosystem. So I've been starting ecosystems for, I don't know, 5 years or something now, and really looking at a collective. The first one I started was called Emerging Being. And it was how do we create the collective, the super organism of all the human beings that are coming together to embody this new reality. All right. So if you look at every human being as a cell in the superorganism of humanity, who are the T cells and the lungs and the heart and the immune system, the nervous system that are saying, hey, I'm signed up for all the challenge and whatever it's going to take to bring about this new way of being on the planet right now. And again, how do we support the supporters of this way of being? That's a lot of what drives me. So that was the first time I ever attempted to run an organization from emergence. And what doesn't work is we all get together. There's no plan at all. We enter the liminal space. And while we get access to all the good stuff, the light of emergent creativity, emergent visioning, access to our genius, flow, our capacities come online, and all the shadow happens, right? Like we have crashes, people's traumas come out, stuff we haven't worked through comes online. And so you're in an environment where in some way you're endeavoring to get something done, and we're all tripping over ourselves and collapsing over ourselves because we can't get up off the ground in some way, right? Like that's what happens when we really open into the unknown and the unfathomable, and what we can't control is all that stuff that's been in the back bedrooms of our psyche and in collective awareness comes out to play in the light. So that didn't work. That didn't work. I mean, it really didn't work. And there were things about it that worked. There were things about it that were awesome. So, and then that informed, over the past couple of years, I ran an incubator called Light in Action. And the impetus for this is the way we see it at the core of what we all are is clear light. And how do we be the light that we are in the world, right? In action, not just like out in nature, not just on a meditation pillow, but in the marketplace and in relationship with other people. I'm going to use air quotes reality, but what I mean is in modernity, maybe, like late stage modernity is a way to put it. And so we have a creative possibility oriented vision for the future. It's called emerging probabilities that temporarily seem impossible, which I could talk about, or anybody can go ouremergingfuture.com and click on emerging probabilities, and you can see the collectively sourced vision for what's possible for humanity. And then we found people who have projects right now that are embodied examples of that vision. These are the people who right here, right now, today are doing the work of building this future. And so we put them through a incubator, accelerator, decelerator program focused on consciousness work and supporting people actualizing their soul purpose in the world. A big part of that was people's relationship with money. But we found, when I talk about things that don't work, it's, again, there was this distinction of, you would think like we went and raised money from investors to give grants to people in our program to support them building their projects. And it goes back to the initial point I was sharing about ending up homeless and needing to suffer through that. It's like I came up with this metaphor when we were doing our incubator of a bird's nest, right? And so when we're in the dependent phase, we're up in the bird's nest with mommy bird getting taken care of. And then we get to the independent phase and get ready to jump. And then all of a sudden we're plummeting at the ground. And so when that's happening, giving someone a grant can be useful in a certain context, in a certain moment, in a certain way, depending on circumstances. But it can also incentivize this weird thing of like wanting to turn around and get back into the bird's nest. And it's like, no, you're out of there. Like, we got to get the strength to fly now. Like, that's the through line to this. This through line is not grants and us bringing you worms, to keep the metaphor and stuff like that. The through line is you essentially going to the gym in your being and getting strong enough to be able to fly, which is what we all deep down want, most of us. So that's something that we learned in the sense of, you would think that going out and raising money for people and giving them funds would be supportive. Well, it depends on the moment. It depends on the context. It depends on where somebody is in their unfolding and whether or not that's going to provide a temporary relief in a moment when someone actually needs to be up against that evolutionary force that's evolving them into the next iteration of their experience in life.
What are some of the indicators you would look for to tell whether or not something like a grant or that would be useful for a person, or whether it would be more useful for them at that moment to be up against that evolutionary friction?
Yeah, I love the question. So my whole life, I've been an athlete. I've been in the gym in some way, martial arts gym, whatever it is. And I'm also a body worker and a functional movement practitioner. So I use a lot of body metaphors. This is true psychologically as well. If anybody like me does trauma work, you know this. If the amount of stimulus and the amount of stress that we have, we're capable of dealing with it. If we have the resources and the capacity to deal with the amount of inputs that we're taking in the moment, we get stronger. If we're resourced enough to handle the experience that we're having. Now, when trauma happens, I define trauma as residue or residual. It's when we have an experience that's too much for us to process in the moment that it's happening. And so we have residual experience that later on, when we're resourced enough, we come back and we resolve whatever's been potentiated and waiting for us until we can complete the moment, complete the experience. And so the same thing goes into this answer. I would look at, does this person have the resources to deal with the stress that they're up against right now? And therefore they're in a process of getting stronger, or are they in a state of, this is too much, right? And we had that too. I mean, you have somebody who's at a state of, have a lot of trauma to deal with, single parent, taking care of, et cetera, et cetera. You stack up the list, and all of a sudden being with a person, you realize this person needs support right now. They're in a total state of overwhelm and need care and nurturing. This is too much. So it's that being able to distinguish, is this person going through a hard time and they're going to come out a lot stronger, or is this too much and they're going to be, I mean, traumatized might be too strong of a word, but not be able to grow through it because it's too much.
The producer of this series, Bruce Alderman, I think he proposed making an integral gym one time in the world. And then I was speaking with Jim Rutt, one of the creators of Game B, and he was proposing a Game B auto body shop. And
Yeah.
usually when I hear this, I wonder why they don't think more directly toward financial options, right? I'm like, why don't we set up an integral credit union or a meta-modern bank? And I think I heard you mention a credit card for emergence somewhere. What do you think is the major obstacle right now between where these networks and people are and actually implementing some sort of significantly functional financial institutions that can harvest and use these people and support them in what they're trying to do?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, Layman. I have answers, and I want to ask you first, actually, because I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. So what's your views?
I think it's a couple of things. I think part of it's the just the emotional sensibility we were talking about, that most people's experiences with financing is of a kind of an abstract, soulless aspect of the economy that even seems parasitical. Maybe there's even something in them that wants to punish that somehow rather than be a part of it. But I think a lot of it's that we just don't have inside experience of a lot of those things, right? Most people in these networks were not necessarily people who went to business school or have worked in those institutions. So they don't really know, they're not comfortable with how you would move forward on that. And I think that's something we need to change. And part of what I was trying to begin to think out with the Meta Modern Business Bureau is who could act as an intermediary on that? Like, who can start to bring financial wisdom together with resonance with the liminal webs? Because a lot of it is emotional, but a lot of it is just we can't see into how those things work and how they get set up. And we don't know who we could trust that would tell us how we could do that in a way that makes sense to us emotionally and physically and psychologically.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with everything you said. And there's a little bit of a slowing down happening over here, hearing you. Yeah, one of my deepest wishes is that for me, everyone who's listening to your podcast, right, and people who listen to my podcast and who are exploring the kinds of questions we're talking about, these are the most brilliant, big-hearted, big consciousness capable resource human beings on planet Earth. And something over here, something in me wants to be like, please stop hating money. Like we need money to be like, we need to be in a healthy relationship with money. Like our relationship with money mirrors our relationships that we have in life. So let's cultivate a healthy relationship with money and welcome in the ways that money wants to support in creating the more beautiful world that we all want to live in and experience together. Like that's just one of the deepest desires in my being, is that we all start to work together with money to make possible what it is that we are holding space for in our hearts and in our beings. So that's number one. And number two,
Yeah.
go ahead. I'll come to number two.
No, that's what I was going to say. What's number two?
Yeah. So number two is I was mentioning some of the things that haven't worked, and who knows if this will work or not. But one of the experiments I'm running now is I was on a call with a human being who I know recently, and she was telling me, well, well, anyway, long story short, the point is I got a very strong hit in the relationship with her to pay her a monthly salary to start working on our emerging future with me. And when I checked, I have a practice of sourcing, which I can talk about and what that is and how that shapes. But when I checked, the guidance and the invitation was don't give her tasks to do, don't give her a role to embody. Give this monthly salary to her, knowing that her following her bliss, her following, like if source is her boss, right? Like if she's orienting to consciousness itself for herself and we're working alongside each other together, this is going to make me, her, us, and everybody involved better off. And so the ultimate grassroots level, and there's so many layers of nuance in this, like it is the right person in the right kind of relationship with the right kind of passion. I mean, again, I can't just go start finding people and handing them a monthly salary to work with me, because there was so much work done in refining the relationship to the point that this is even evident that it's possible. And I can at very least engineer, like I can imagine or dream up a world, but I also have a deep felt sense of this interconnected fabric, this web of reality where we're all in the gifts that we're most like in our DNA built for, right? And also financially resourced in doing that. Like I'm living this life now, I'm able to pay somebody else to step into this life. And if she and I can create a higher level of thriving, which is what we're inviting the whole ecosystem into together, more and more folks can enter this potential. And so for me, it's this through line of I've spent a lot of time personally suffering through how do I get strong enough to personally be at stage 4 in my model, which is like pursuing my passion, cultivating my curiosity, doing what lights me up, sets my soul on fire, experiencing fulfillment, and also having financial resources. And now I have somebody who's like late stage 3, maybe you could say, who I can support financially to come into stage 4, who also is embodying this state. And for me, when you talk about the banks, so to your question, the banks and the institutions, it's like the reality of these institutions that you're speaking of is already here. And it's a state of consciousness that we're not all embodying. And so the courage that it takes to step into this way of being and walking through the world, with also being resourced with the capacities and the facilities that we need to move through the world in relationship with each other through this place. Well, now the more and more of us who come online in this way from this place together, the more we create a shared resonance field and collectively manifest these financial institutions and gyms and other things that you're speaking about that we sense are possible and already here in a way. So for me, I'm like, how do we build escalators in consciousness to support more people getting to this place? And number 1, embodying the way of being. Number 2, having the capacities. And 3, connected to and moved by the vision of what's coming through. Then it's already all here now. Like there's no way if a critical mass of people were moving through the world from where you and I are hanging out right now, that all these things wouldn't just instantaneously come online, because it's evident. It's immediately evident. It's like, how could this not exist? Well, it already does. It just hasn't showed up in form yet.
Yeah, there's like an image of the generation of surplus, which is part of how I think about retro engineering spiritual and religious practices in general, but it's applicable to all of these different dimensions, right? And everybody's good at some aspect of it. Everybody's sharing something that they're really good at, and to the point where they have too much of. And if they can share that in a way that causes other people to be able to not just have some, but generate more, then we have like an actually functional trickle down system in a way.
Yeah.
It was making me think of so 5 or 6 months ago, Turquoise and I were at a cabin together. We were kicking around this notion of anchor funding, and how do we get money that stabilizes people in their lives, especially people who we think, boy, just taking a load off that person is good for the world. Whatever they do is amazing. So there's that aspect of it, but then there's this a balance out of like, well, maybe we need to keep people focused on particular tasks. We need certain things from them, right? And there's a constant balance back and forth between those two things. And it's similar in my mind to the balance of setting up business projects with people in terms of, are you going to go with your like vibe crew, or are you going to go with a functional crew, or where's the overlap between those? How do you personally think about like just supporting people who have the right vibe versus trying to make sure we don't sway too far into that and keep our focus on what's observably functional to the point where we could point to outside forces and go, look, this works.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. Yeah, I feel touched getting this question because I live in these questions, right? Like, so it's like the Buddha and the businessman. How do we you gotta have both and more, right? Both are necessary and not sufficient, I promise. So that's part of the answer, right? It's like we need all that and more is the honest question. We need, like I said, the skills, the capacities, the faculties, and we need the vibe, the energetic, the state of consciousness, the way of being and walking through the world. We need to have done our shadow work and worked through the things that are inhibiting and holding constrictions in the shape of our consciousness. We need to have we space capacity and be able to work in the interpersonal fields. There's quite a bit of, in my experience, one of the most important things is the capacity for radical truth telling and genuineness and realness in the moment of I mean, I had a potential coaching client the other day for whatever, $15,000 or something, and I got a very hard no in relationship with this person. Of course, my mind's kicking and screaming, going, how could this possibly be? We need this money to build things, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I got to listen to the truth of what's here. And what's been amazing has been what's unfolded in discovery, staying in relationship with this person since the no or not now came through of what is the connection that's here. And let's continue to be in relationship and explore this. But it's like your priorities change, right? Like for me, there's a prioritizing over going with inner knowing or going over what is capital R right action or sourced action and honoring that above whatever amount of money seems like a lot or a little, depending on relativity, right? But it's like the priorities change. But at some point, there's a conviction of I'm going to go with what, like I can't not live into what I know needs to happen in the moment. I would never put anything over that, anything, and let all the symbols, let all the materials, let all the consequences take care of themselves, and stick with that process, that non-symbolic process of cultivating what's most essential, and let it take care of manifesting the world that we're living in. We give ourselves fully over to that evolutionary unfolding. I don't even know if I'm answering your question anymore, but I'm going to pause here.
No, it's wonderful though, and it makes me like, part of our ability to do that is the ability to tolerate the feeling of risk that's involved, and that's part of, I think, growing these capacities in all ways. And like what you see in the gambling addict is like a pathological version of what it actually takes to move well through you. Is you're always taking a chance. You have to execute and be potentially executed, so to speak. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's this having seen that it works that you're obviously expressing, right? You go through, say, like, well, what if I pass up on this? But it turns out what that means is it didn't necessarily go in that form. It doesn't mean that it's nothing or leads nowhere. And that's something you learn by having it succeed. But I'm wondering if that capacity is something that we should trust when it's developed to a certain level in us. Like, does it get smarter to the point where we trust it? Or as a lot of people seem to feel, it's magically correct the whole time, and all we do is just switch over to listening to those prompts.
Yeah, well, it's magic at first, right? Like anything new is magic at first, and then we understand what's going on underneath the hood, and we codify. I use the word codify, but whatever, engineer it, reverse engineer it, codify it, and understand what is it that's actually going on. And then the next thing we discover is magic until we discover how that works, right? So yeah, initially it is magic, and then it becomes evident how the deeper layers of reality are at least appearing to unfold, right?
That's great. I like that. Take the dichotomies and stack them. Beautiful. So one thing that I see in networks or subnetworks or groups, projects, organizations within these fields that are moving money through them is this sort of tension between, on the one hand, they want to be high integrity. And that means a lot of things, means collective shadow, means moral exercise, means all this kind of thing. On the other hand, there's a risk that constantly like relitigating how we're doing business and is this ethically appropriate and who's doing what and what's the ideological or emotional or ancestral baggage that's coming into it, we can sort of get in the way of the actual ability to make money in an enterprise because we're constantly worried about whether it's good enough or clean enough or leading edge enough. So how do you balance those two drives between this has to actually make money, but also we want it to be a high integrity and we don't want those getting in each other's way?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and it brings in one of my favorite examples, which is say for example we had uh, I have coaching clients, or let's say we have startup founders or incubator. This happens a lot, and someone says, I need to pay my credit card, and when I go to pay my credit card, it brings up all these memories of like, et cetera, when I was a kid and next to and there's a discernment process of like literally, okay, well, if you were to pay your credit card right now, like what device would you do it on? I do it on my computer. Okay. Like, is there a application you use? Yeah, Google Chrome. Is there a website you go to? Yeah. And they like type it in and you go, okay, is there a button you press and they press it? Great. You paid your credit card. Right. And so it's like on that end of the spectrum, we don't need to do trauma work and shadow work and healing work. We need to get into an action flow and sort of get out of our own way and get the thing done. And that goes all the way to the other side of the spectrum, which is we might have the exact same example, and someone really needs to go in and go through a healing process and bring something to completion so that then their own natural organic impulse is to take the action that needs to be taken for the thing to get done. So there's different depths of interventions, right, that we can do here and different ways that we can orient when giving support. And there's a discernment process on that spectrum, right? Like, and what's also underneath here, for me, what gets evoked in your question too, again, is priorities. Because a lot of, when I first started reading Reinventing Organizations, for example, with Frederick Laloux, I'm like, oh, all these workplaces are the gathering places of the future for business are going to be places where we can come to heal and grow and awaken and develop. And it's like, that's great. And then you get a bunch of people to do that together and you end up doing that the whole time and you don't make any money. And it's like, hey, this has been great and everything, but this is not a business. This is a processing. This is a processing community. We don't have any offers. We don't have any sales. We don't make any money. And I'm speaking from lived experience, by the way. This is not a hypothetical. I've done this. So, so now what we do, like, for example, I'm hosting some gatherings around the world this year, and there's, of course, passion around trauma and collective healing. How do we do these things? So for us, there's language now around post-healing gatherings, post-healing economies, when shadow work and healing work, once we become aware of it and robust, then it never stops. And at some point, it might not be it might be a more back burner activity of our lives. Like for me, there's a pretty robust shadow work process happening for me in every moment. But there were years of my life where my entire life was about healing and shadow work explicitly. I mean, it's just my entire reason for existing. That's not the case anymore, right? And so in gatherings and in organizations of the future or of this consciousness, we create contexts. Like in Zoom, we create breakout rooms where if we're in a collective space and we're collectively emerging something and someone has a crash or a trauma come up, they can go out in a breakout room and get support and then be able to come back in and participate in it. So we have the option to process as a group, and we have the option and the infrastructure, right? We talk about supporting the supporters. This is really hard work, all right? I call it being a professional athlete in consciousness. Like it's a all day, everyday peak experience oftentimes for people. So we do have crashes and we do have things come up that we need support with. And so whether it's a breakout room or the capacity to just call someone and get support, that doesn't have to capsize the whole project, right? It doesn't have to take over. It can be put into a context and held a larger whole of what's unfolding.
I'm sure you know, as I do, a few people involved in this who are heavily oriented toward Bitcoin.
I do. I'm living in it right now. I'm in Uvita in Costa Rica, which is like almost entirely running on Bitcoin. This might be the first Bitcoin country.
Okay, perfect. So what's your sense, what's your hunch, what's your feeling about the role that the mutation, the change of currency is going to play in all of this? What's the role of digital currency and like emerging currency alternatives in general as part of this new economy?
Yeah. Well, the first thing out of the chute that comes for me is I really was big on this until I found Sarah McCrum and the work she's doing with Love To, which I sent you. We can link it in the show notes. But anyone looking this up or listening to this, please look up Love To, LOVETO .group, because this was maybe the most pioneering finance project I've seen, and it was done in fiat-backed currency. So it really reoriented me in terms of the need for currencies. But basically, what they did is they found all these regenerative farms in Australia and said, "Hey, let's create a meta model to actually value the benefit, the ecological, environmental, social benefit that these farmers are contributing to the planet, to the food, to the world by being regenerative farmers." Backdated that for 30 years and created a financial instrument that's listed now, I'm pretty sure on the Swiss stock exchange, and raised, I'm pretty sure it was $1.5 billion for regenerative farms in Australia. And it was done in fiat currencies. So I was pretty stunned just to see like that capacity for impact done in a conventional market from a post-conventional orientation, and with different tools, right? With more resource tools. I say all of this because, well, number one, I want everyone to check out Love To and be aware of that. Two, it gets into value, right? Like when you look at regenerative farming actually being valued, when you look at well-being marketplaces, healthcare marketplaces, right now in the world, human beings have a price tag valuation if we're sick. There's no price tag valuation for being well. So you could imagine that we will very shortly live in, if we, not already, but very shortly live in a world where people's value in a well-being marketplace will actually be higher because you're embodying well-being, not because you're sick. These are like fundamental tectonic plates in economics that are really important to check out on all the people who are doing all this incredible shadow work and transformational work and healing work right now. There's no value marketplace that's valuing transformational work and personal evolution. So imagine that actually is possible, and that all the people who are devoting themselves to doing all this work that we know is so needed to be able to show up in the world and embody what it is we care about, that's actually valued financially, right? So these are the kinds of financial markets that we're envisioning. Now, for me, the iterations that are happening on blockchain and Bitcoin, it's pretty amazing the consciousness they're coming from. Like I'm down here, as I mentioned, in Uvita in Costa Rica, and they built an app down here called Bitcoin Jungle, which doesn't even have any transaction fees to send on a Lightning transaction on Bitcoin. So you're getting to the point now of being able to exchange. And of course, you could feel the consciousness because everyone goes, "Hey, download this app," and they all start sending each other money as like play, and you can feel the lightness of it. It's not this like tight grasp. I need to hold on to every Bitcoin I have. There's a real freedom and robustness of, oh, here, download the app. Okay, let me send you some money so you can see how it works. Now you practice sending him some money, and there's this just like lightheartedness of, okay, I can feel the coming onlineness of the consciousness where we're able to share this easily and freely with each other. And so that's the biggest thing I find hanging out in Bitcoin communities, although I do experience we're still predominantly there's like maybe this would be the Buddha and the Bitcoin instead of the Buddha and the businessman, but very prefrontal cortex heavy, like in the place of figuring out how all this is going to work. And I was speaking to a lot of Bitcoiners these last days because there was a Bitcoin Freedom Festival here at the place where I'm staying. It's like a huge event in the Bitcoin world. And I'm meeting people and I'm just going, the level of resonance and shared heart I feel with people working on Bitcoin is so deep. All the applications being built on the blockchain, everything that's happening. It's not my explicit work in the world. I have clients who are building these things. It's not it's not like my hands are on it directly, but my hands are on people whose hands are on it, if that makes sense. As a body worker, that might sound a little less weird. It might still sound weird, but but I just am like overwhelmed with appreciation that there are so many people who are devoting their entire life to building this, because I can feel the technological backbone of the emerging economy being deeply informed by what's happening in Bitcoin.
When you mentioned the value of being well, it made me think of, and I can't remember if we talked about this before or not, but when I was more heavily ensconced in the integral community, I would play this thought game called Tetra Bucks, right? So the idea would be, what if we had a currency that sourced its value from four different values rather than one? And the one would be like, price negotiations, the kind of standard mechanism we have. And another one would be objective reality, right? And so the people who do ecological economics make this argument that a tree in the woods is actually doing something valuable. And you have to be, if we counted that, then it might be a net loss to cut it down and sell it for lumber, depending on the specifics, right? So we'd have to invest material resources with actual values. And then there's the kind of Facebook argument, which is, why don't likes count as a currency? All right. And you could modify likes to do it. If you had a limited number, if there were dislikes, you could start to get some kind of peer system going. And then there's a subjective individual thing, which is, why aren't I worth more when I'm happier or when I'm in love or when I'm healthy? These sorts of things. And what would a currency look like if it drew from multiple sources of value rather than just one source of value? But one of the reasons it strikes me that we don't have anything like that is because for most people, it's very hard to think in terms of numbers. They want to go, yeah, okay, there's the market, but there's a lot of stuff you just can't put a number on. And they mean that for them and the things they value and that they're good at valuing, it's very difficult for them to figure out any kind of quantitative assessment of that. And I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about has to do with, and this goes back to people's childhood, just a weirdness about numbers that for some people it's very difficult. There's no flow for them around numbers.
Yeah, yeah. So to make it even more practical, can you give us an example of this, like when something that would need to be numbered in this valuation model that folks might have a hard time putting a number to?
Yeah, that would be okay. Well, I think that the tree is an excellent example, right? Because it's standard in ecological economics. What's the value of having a tree in your yard? As opposed to cutting it down and selling it for lumber, right? And you go, well, I don't know. I don't even know how I would be. First of all, I don't know how I would begin to get a number for it. It would be complicated. Sure, it would, but the rest of the market is complicated as well. So that's not an obstacle. But then they go, well, wouldn't that steal the way that I appreciate the tree or the flight of the starlings, or right? Wouldn't I be denigrating my love if I put a number on it? Right. So people have that difficulty. They have that. And in some ways, it seems like the system we live in encourages us to have anxiety around that. But I think for most people, it's just that we were never A, taught to have fun with numbers, but B, taught to do anything creative. Like most of us are not like experimental physicists where we try to come up with some new numbers for a thing. Most of us are like, well, we're given numbers and we try to fend them off somehow. We don't understand it as a creative, elastic process. And so it might be that that's temperament, or it might be that it's a flaw in the educational model that we're using. But I think a lot of people have, going back to school, like emotional concern about the coldness of numbers.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I can tell you, I mean, I majored in math and economics in college. I love numbers more than anything in the world, and I have a very hard time telling you what the tree in the backyard is worth. So I don't know if that's a numbers issue. That's a complexity issue. I mean, how, like, as soon as you ask that question, how do you cut the tree off from the whole? I mean, it's
Yeah.
just it's instantaneously mind and paradigm blasting and heart opening, because we realize the interconnectedness of all things. So how cool. Thanks, numbers, for falling apart so we can fail to understand them.
It's really weird because there's like obviously when you start to chunk reality up and want to apply numbers to it, it feels very crude. But then also you're like, that's also the first step of a much more textured
Mhm.
mapping of the
Mhm.
world with numbers. And so we don't really know what we want to do. And we do want to, because we look at the way the economy is and we say, well, it certainly favors some outcomes over others. we have to be careful to protect the things that it's not valuing. But at the same time, if we're not mapping those things via numbers into the economy is not registering them. And so it operates, the invisible hand moves as if those things aren't real. So we might need to have, and it'll be experimental at first. It seems like it would be difficult, but all kinds of number mappings are. It wasn't, this one always stands out to me. The ability to put numbers on energy conservation in physics was not immediately obvious. It's not immediately obvious that you kick a ball and 10 units go from your leg into the ball and then it rolls and then a few of them leak into the ground, right? That's not clear. It took a lot of people hundreds of years of weird guessing in order to figure out how to put numbers on this process. But I feel like if we don't enumerate qualitatively different sources of value, then our quantitative machine, which kind of runs by itself, won't notice those things and it won't use them as part of its navigation. And we end up with sort of the accumulating meta crisis problem that we're looking at.
Yeah, and from the math and from what's going on underneath the hood, right? Like we're talking about the economy. We're talking about the economy. And I liked earlier you said economies, because you said transitional economies. And for me, there are different economies all over the place. I experience different economies in a family, right? Economics means household at its root word in Latin. Economics means home, it means household. So the dynamics that are at play in our home, in our field, in our economics, I experience it differently in any community I go visit, any business I'm a part of. And as you're mentioning the math, right? We have third person perspective Newtonian physics, right? That the energy from my foot kicks a ball 10 meters across the field. Very third person physics. Then you go to fourth person Einstein relativity, and then fifth person quantum. The math is fundamental. The math doesn't work the same in third person, fourth person, fifth person. And they're used for different things. But in the spaces we're hanging out in, we're playing in fifth person math at least, which is how do we quantify the value of facilitating collective emergence? How do we quantify the value of midwifing in new potentials from the unmanifest into space and time, birthing a new universe into being, or hospicing out the old, right? Being available for trauma processing. These are entirely different mathematical equations. And of course, as more and more people start to orient from these grounds, we will collectively manifest the same way science has led the way in a lot of ways, or conscious pioneers have led the way in a lot of ways. At some point, financial markets might catch up, and we might actually have a way that we value these things. And in some way, for me, it's not actually the point, right? The point is not that we figure out precisely how to get the dollars and cents on this. Maybe that'll help, maybe it won't. The point is that we start to orient from the place that we do and walk through the world in the way that we do when we see the value and honor the value in the things that we're talking about in the ecosystems, in natural systems, in other human beings, in compassion, love, curiosity, virtue, integrity, are the virtues that we're speaking about. That's what's actually going to manifest. I don't want to be cheesy, but heaven on earth, right? That's gonna manifest the new realms into this reality. If we come up with mathematical ways to precisely calculate that with numbers, cool. I'll totally celebrate that and think it's awesome. But I don't know if I'm ever going to claim that was the point.
No, it's certainly not the whole point. I think it would be a great supportive ally, and I think also it's protective as we start to generate AIs, right, or quasi-intelligences of various kinds, and allow them to take over more and more of these systems for us. They can potentially generate new kinds of number mappings in a way that doesn't require Schrodinger to work out the equation, so to speak. But on the other hand, because they're going to be running this thing, we want to be able to put what we're talking about in a language that the machines can understand, as well as working on it in a way that humans can manifest.
Yeah, I'm having a pretty psychoactive experience as you're saying this right now. I've been tracking this object in consciousness that I call the intelligence interface. And so it's, if you look at consciousness, source, the divine, intelligence, capital I intelligence, and how it moves into forms of intelligence, artificial intelligence, human intelligence. It's kind of like how the light comes in and hits the prism and then manifests into different colors. The intelligence interface I experience is the prism. And so the more I've communed with this intelligence interface and gotten into it to understand how is it that capital I intelligence then manifests out into the forms of intelligence like AI and human intelligence, what just happened for me as you were speaking was seeing financial intelligence as one of the colors of that rainbow, seeing it as one of the forms of intelligence that comes out of the fractal. And so that really gives me a nice invitation for some meditation and listening of how to human intelligence, financial intelligence, and artificial intelligence work together. And seeing what really happens is, for me, it's, I used to see a lot of people right now are trying to do AI alignment on a horizontal, hierarchical way. How do we get AI and human beings to work together? But for me, if you go down into this intelligence interface and deeper down into capital I intelligence, you see that, of course, AI and humanity are not two. They're birthed from the same intelligence, and they have a lot of the same core coding in them through the intelligence interface object that I've been tracking. And so it helps me in this moment orient to artificial intelligence, financial intelligence, and human intelligence as a product of the same source, and see the deeper substrata that are permeating through each one. It might just illuminate answers to the question you're evoking. So I'm having a little bit of a trip over here in real time.
No, that's terrific. And even the phrase financial intelligence, it's really interesting because when you look at models where they talk about our development along different kinds of talent trajectories or different kinds of intelligence, I never see financial intelligence on those lists of basic capacities. It would be nice to at least have it included.
Yeah, and exactly, have it included as a line of development for human beings. And this is the other thing I almost have to make sure I let everybody know this is I experience money itself. I'm not talking about credit cards and dollars and cents and bitcoins. I'm talking about a being, a consciousness itself, an intelligence itself that speaks to me. Like I can ask money questions and it'll answer. That we can be in communion with, that we can be in relationship with. And so financial intelligence as a line of intelligence of understanding things like, in a basic world, how do I balance my checkbook? But in a grown-up meaning in a later stage capacity or some faculties that might come online, or cultivating a relationship with money, communing with money, and experiencing money as the teacher that I've experienced. I experienced money as a her. The experience that I've experienced money as a her, as a teacher, as a tremendous guide and catalyst for evolution and awakening in my experience. So the financial intelligence itself, of intelligence of money and intelligence of finance. The Austrian economists used to say, there's no individual who can know what a marketplace can know. Right? It's like there's no point of awareness that can know what the whole field knows. It's like we're getting the collective intelligence factor of like we the field. Right. And so financial intelligence, oftentimes, if you study Austrian economics, you can see how emergent phenomena emerges out of the actions and interactions of individuals, oftentimes through pricing, not even knowing what's going on in the rest of the marketing, but higher order outcomes manifesting due to the underlying structure that emerges markets. And this is just going one layer deeper into the intelligence itself that is the evolutionary impulse that's permeating through that phenomenon.
One of the things coming up for me is, Austrian and Keynesian are often put together as rivals. But I can see that one of the beautiful things about the Keynesian approach is that it puts an emphasis on flow itself. The more money moving through the system, the more money gets generated in the system. And then in the Austrian approach, there's like this Nassim Taleb kind of awareness of unpredictable outcomes and emergence. And you have to work with it without knowing exactly what it's going to produce, and trust that working with produces a higher order intelligence. And somehow those are almost like the right and left hand of some kind of appreciation of a higher order financial intelligence, imaginally conceived of as an entity, as this money goddess, whatever you're talking about here. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I was in the river this morning having this exact same line of exploration of like, could it really be possible that a being does know what the whole field knows and is able to Keynesian its way to higher economic order outcomes? Yeah, it's certainly not what I learned reading about Keynesian economics, and I'm open to other potentials.
This is I don't want to say endless, but there's a lot more conversation we could have. But also, I feel like having come to a quasi religious moment in the conversation, this is also a pretty nice spot to end and a pretty good time chunk for a listener to be able to deal with.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, had to make sure we get to a quasi religious moment. So it feels like a good place to pause. Put all our power into a power god. It's really just the goddess of money who's controlling all this. We don't if it rains tomorrow or not is out of our control.
I love that this is where we've ended up. All hail the money goddess.
All hail the money goddess. I've got T-shirts with the money goddess on it. You can. No, I'm just kidding. I don't.